One of the biggest stories in America today has to do with the U.S. Postal Service. Where did this story even come from? We're going to unpack it a little bit today. Start off with 3 things you should know about the Postal Service, including a fun historical fact. The U.S. Postal Service dates back to the beginning of America. The very first Postmaster General was actually Benjamin Franklin. And the U.S. Postal Service is very unique. It is an essential federal service, but it is not funded daily by taxpayer money. And it's because of this unique financial infrastructure, part of the reason why it's in really terrible financial position. This has been happening for decades, but you should know over the last decade or so, the U.S. Postal Service has lost about $78 billion. And it's for all sorts of reasons, from the fact that we're using email a lot more than we are sending letters, to debt and liabilities and trying to pay pensions for workers and all sorts of reasons that, quite frankly, we don't have time for. But the U.S. Postal Service, it's been well known, is really teetering on the edge. And so you fast forward to 2020 and the pandemic has made things worse for everybody, including the U.S. Postal Service. On top of that, it's an election year. And although your state administers your elections and really dictates how you vote, the Postal Service has a role because the Postal Service helps take in absentee ballots. That's when, you're not actually present and you're able to vote in your state, and mail-in ballots, which some states use more than others. So 2020 has been a very challenging year for the Postal Service and, quite frankly, all of us. But this is where the story picks up. Just recently, there was an economic stimulus bill that was trying to make its way through Congress. Republicans and Democrats disagreed about this bill, so it hasn't passed. Democrats put together about a $3 trillion bill that Republicans criticized, saying it was way too big and had too many things added onto it that weren't really targeted for the immediate crisis as we know it. One of those items is $25 billion for the U.S. Postal Service. The U.S. president came out last week and said that this essentially was a non-starter for him because he felt that the Democrats were trying to push money to the U.S. Postal Service to encourage mail-in ballots. And with saying it directly and indirectly, the U.S. president was saying that Democrats are trying to encourage fraud because mail-in ballots, according to the president, are not reliable or trustworthy. Now, Democrats came back and said, wait a minute, that's not what we're trying to do. And you, Mr. President, are actually trying to suppress voters by making the U.S. Postal Service less efficient and starving it of funds that it actually needs. The president comes back and says, no, I'm not. You're trying to cheat. And the Democrats say, no, we're not. You're trying to cheat. End scene. So that's where we're at right now today. In the middle of all of this, there's a plot twist. There's a new Postmaster General that was appointed by President Trump. And this Postmaster General's job, by the way, used to be a cabinet position, it's not anymore, is to try to help the financial viability of the U.S. Postal Service. And he's a controversial figure because apparently he's a Republican donor and he came in trying to put cost-cutting measures in place just over the last several months. We're in the middle of a pandemic. These cost-cutting measures are in place. And Democrats are saying, see, Mr. President, you put somebody in, again, trying to make the U.S. Postal Service less of a resource for the public. The Postmaster General says, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to make the Postal Service more efficient. So again, side story, but all part of it. So what does the U.S. Postal Service say in all of this? A couple weeks ago, the Postal Service sent out a letter to more than 40 states. And I'm paraphrasing here. They said, hey guys, listen up. Here's the deal. A lot of you guys are trying to figure out how to make mail-in voting more accessible because of the pandemic, and you don't want voters waiting in line or afraid to come vote because of COVID-19. But if you're actually looking to make mail-in ballots more accessible, you have to send these ballots to people at least, ideally, 3 weeks before the election. So we're talking early October. And the U.S. Postal Service is just like, heads up. You got to do that because you can't just send them out like a couple days before the election and expect us to collect them and be able to help you process them. So here we are. 2020 is election year. The U.S. Postal Service every day processes more than 470 million items of mail. So there's a big question about what does the election look like in 2020? In states that have held elections, there have been issues with mail-in ballots and being able to process this surge in mail-in ballots. What does that look like for a major federal election where we're electing the president? All right. Hope that covers a couple of the details. There's a lot to this story that goes back years and years and years. But I'm curious what you think about this all. What do you think of the Democrats' position? What do you think about the Republicans? And is there maybe a creative solution to help make voting in 2020 safe and efficient? You know, the pandemic is changing a lot about how we live daily life in America. Is this one of the ways that we're going to see another major change, whether it's the way that we get or deliver mail or the way that we vote? All right, guys. A lot more going on this week, including the Democratic National Convention. We're covering that. We're watching for any highlights that are coming out. The Republicans go next week. This is when we actually see the parties step forward and really present to the American people what is their argument for why they should be elected to lead the nation. We're watching that along with a lot of other news. Let us know what else you'd like to hear about, and always more on smartnews.com. Have a great day.